It's truly a great privilege for me to get this invitation to say a few words tonight, to share my experience. I do think that one thing we could learn from the Americans is the way in which they do honour their presidents, and we could do the same, I think, for our Prime Ministers in a much more fulsome way than we have. And I think what has happened here with John Curtin and honouring him is a wonderful thing, and I do think not only because he was Prime Minister, but as you said, John, he did struggle himself with his own demons, yet he shouldered huge responsibilities on behalf of all of us, all Australians, and he did so with great distinction. So it has a message in itself, I think, which is, I suppose, one of the reasons I'm standing here tonight. I felt the privilege of getting, by the time I finally did confront a condition that I had, I got wonderful support and advice and professional treatment, and I would like to the best of my ability, demonstrate to others that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and you can in fact shoulder significant responsibilities and even greater responsibilities in managing or overcoming a depressive condition. What I have learnt is that it comes in all shapes and sizes, this depression ailment. I know nothing about it really other than my own experience, so tonight I'd like to share that. What I have found is that there are some common traits or features or approaches to trying to deal with it, but each time it's different for everyone nevertheless. So I don't pretend to know any more than my own experience, and I thought it would be appropriate just to take you through that tonight and then to answer questions. For 43 years, from the time that I was about 12 or 13, I went to sleep every night, taking on the world. I think by nature I'm an optimistic person, and I would invariably go to sleep fairly satisfied with the day, or maybe not, but positive nevertheless, and also looking forward to the next day, thinking who I had to call, what I had to do, what challenges, how I could take things forward. That was my general frame of mind. And I slept. I've always slept well, which I think has probably been one of the great aids to me getting through some of the issues that I've had to deal with. But always, in 43 years, every morning that I woke for those 43 years, I would be the opposite. It was almost, it's a funny phenomenon really. I would wake and I would feel like I was going down in an elevator. Almost a sort of split-second thing, and then I'd feel myself hit the basement, and I would almost groan to myself that I'm back there. And I'd be in a state of mind where I had no confidence. I didn't want to take decisions. I didn't want to confront issues. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I'd be quiet, I'd be pessimistic, and often quite frustrated. Now, for the first, I don't know, I'm not sure how long, but 10 or 20 years, that was my life for the first 2.5 hours. So, woke up at 6, by 8:30, I'd be through it, and I would feel this cloud sort of lift, if you like. And of course, in my teenage years, I don't know any teenager that was with it before 9 o'clock, so it really didn't have much impact on me, to be honest. But my parents, I did say, once I had confronted this, my parents in their 80s, and I spoke to them about all this, and because I'd never had mentioned it, and they said that, I said, what was I like as a kid? Because I couldn't remember having a problem when I was young. And my mother said that I was the happiest of all 9 children. I'm one of 9. And she said, but in my teenage years I went quiet. and they just put it down to hormones and whatever. And I did leave home at about 16 and a half to go and do an agricultural diploma. So what they saw of me, by the time I'd go off to school, by the time I got back I was my normal self. And but that was my life, and I put it down to the fact that I was just a morning person. I thought that's what being a morning person was, that you weren't able to, get your head together in the first few hours. And that was my day for 43 years, except it got worse. The little black dog that used to visit me early on got longer and longer. But for most of that time, I learned to manage it, and it wasn't really of any great consequence on our family, I don't think. My wife used to say to people, Andrew and I don't discuss the state of our marriage before 8:30, and the kids don't ask for money, right? But outside of that, it wasn't a big item, really. I would be off to work at 7:30, 7:15, whatever. And it was just known in the household that Dad didn't talk, Dad didn't say much. And I'd answer the kids and whatever if I had to, but I wouldn't go out of my way. And I'd be looking to get out of the house so that I could share my own company for a while I got to the office. I did have all sorts of ridiculous strategies. I spent my life looking for endorphins. I always thought, I never admitted I had depression, of course, this is part of it. I would think that you've got to release endorphins to pick yourself up. And I'd read that if you look at some people who look at the sun, I'm one of them, you sneeze often. And if you sneeze, you release endorphins. So we lived I ran the National Farmers Federation in the 80s and the Liberal Party, the campaign side, and I was federal director in a lot of the 90s, and we lived 20 minutes out of Canberra on 30 acres, and I would drive into town to Coal City, but it's a lot of sunshine hours, and 2 or 3 times on the trip in, I would stop, look at the sun, sneeze, turn the car back on, off I'd go again, right? Just to try and get myself up. I'd also read that, in fact, I had a wonderful collection of books because my wife and I we like bookshops, we like reading. And so we'd always be wandering, weekends and things. But I would so often gravitate to the positive thinking part of the bookshop. Never the depression, because of course I didn't have depression, right? But I'd get to positive thinking part of the bookshop. And actually, if any of you would like any collection of positive books, I can give you a magnificent collection and still have some over. But in one of the books, it said if you laugh, you got a big belly laugh, you release endorphins and you feel better. Well, you do. It's a known phenomena. But also, if you smile, your brain gets a message that to release endorphins. But also, if your face assumes a characteristic of a smile, your brain is confused and thinks you're smiling and releases endorphins. So for 10 years, I drove into Canberra with my endorphin pen, thinking I was doing anything. Hot showers were absolutely critical to me. And later on, when we got near water, I swim 1,500 metres every morning. That became a really important part. I don't know about so much the exercise as I thought I was releasing endorphins again, but I think it was more the meditation. People say, how can you swim up and down a pool? And, 60 times. And it must drive you mad. But I would be counting. And it's just like in meditation, you're counting. And I'd just get in there, no phones, didn't have to talk to anybody, and up and down I'd go. And it was a very soothing thing for me, very important part of my day. Since I've tackled the issue and written a book, Black Dog Days, I noticed I realised when I was writing the book that my whole life, in fact, I've been chasing adrenaline. My whole career has been structured, I think, around adrenaline rushes, just like the endorphin rush. And I know when I was 28, I had a chance to got accepted to do a PhD at Harvard. And I was an economist at the time, and at the same time I got offered a job as the economist with the National Farmers Federation, which had just been formed out of all of the historical national farmer groups into one organisation in 1989. And I chose to go to the Farmers Federation. Now, all my peer group who were economists, professional economists, they couldn't, for the life of them, they couldn't understand why I would go off to what they called a grubby lobby group and not go and do a PhD. And I never, in my own mind, sort of confronted it to the extent of why, but I'm certain now. I mean, I'd already had experiences where I'd spent 2 or 3 months where I was doing projects which I was largely by myself, research type projects, and I was in a bad space. And I'd also had experiences where I was involved in negotiations or public speaking, sometimes in difficult circumstances where people were challenging you, and I would find myself in a much better space when the adrenaline was pumping. And I think I just gravitated in life to positions, because I'd hear in later years, I'd hear the phone at 6 a.m. and my stomach would just fall. I knew it was a journalist, you know, and it's something that happened overnight that I wasn't aware of, and I'd have to respond and da-da-da. And I'd answer the call and find out what's going on, and so I'll ring you back in 10 while I thought about it, or I might have to make a call or something. And then I'd do that, but as soon as I got back on the phone, for that 10 minutes, it was sort of hell to me, because I'd be so lacking in confidence and not wanting to deal with it. But then the interview would start, the adrenaline would pump, I'd be fine, and afterwards I'd come out that morning, I'd come out of the funk a lot earlier than I would otherwise. So it was like getting a hit every time something like that happened, and so it went. You put on a good face, and I think hundreds of thousands of others do the same, with all sorts of conditions, in many cases I think a lot worse than mine. But there are so many people, I think, that I've got no doubt that you've worked with or associated with closely, who today would be hiding a mental health problem which you probably have never twigged to. Even close family often has not twigged to. So many people now have, you know, I've spoken in literally dozens and dozens of places, especially a lot of Rotary, and the stories I hear now of people just, it's sad really, because they feel no way of dealing with it. And the only way to deal with it is to hide it and not confront it. And it's because there always has been a stigma, and I'm sure it's why I never confronted it. I was ambitious, I liked decision making, I've run organisations for 30 years, I like responsibility, but in the mornings I didn't. And I knew that I subconsciously knew that if I had any reference to psychiatrist or psychologist on my medical history, most of the jobs that I went for through my life, I wouldn't have got. And if I was 40 again today, I wouldn't tell anybody, frankly. I might tell my wife and I'd confront it, but I wouldn't tell the world, because I think it's improving, but it's still there in spadefuls. There's still things happening. Anytime something might happen to me where I trip up or make a mistake, I'll have my very concerned colleagues, or some of them, saying to journalists, isn't it unfortunate that Andrew might be having a relapse, and things like this. I mean, it's human nature, but it's out there. And the thing is that most people associate mental health problems with a character weakness, and it's associated with being unreliable. If you've got a mental health problem, you're probably no good in a crisis. Well, the irony is that for me, and I can't speak for anyone else, but I've got no doubt that for a lot of people who've got a depressive condition, the opposite might well be the case, as it was for me. I get the adrenaline running, and that's when I'm best. I am very cool, I can make decisions, I don't panic, but I was always best no matter what time of the day if there was a crisis. And a lot of people said to me afterwards when they'd found out, how did you run the campaigns? I ran John Howard's campaign in '96, and I ran John Houston's campaign in '93, and I was involved in lots of others. How did you run the campaigns? You know, because it's a crisis a minute for 33 days. And for me, I'd look forward to it, because I'd go to bed at 11:30, I'd get up at 4:30, first meeting 5:15, and I would make decisions non-stop until 11:30, and there'd be crises non-stop. It's the nature of a campaign, really, is to try and see how people respond under waves of crises, because then you find, well, if they happen to be in government and there's unexpected crises, you know, can they cope? It really is, there's some method in the madness, I think. But you are put into this situation where you feel like you no longer get the salt water out of your eyes and another wave's hitting you. And that's the sort of phenomena of a campaign. And I loved it. I looked forward to it because I knew I'd be in the sweet spot where I never got in the mornings the problem that I normally would have. In my 40s and 50s, the little black dog got bigger and bigger, and instead of being 8:30 or 9 o'clock, it was 9:30, 10:30. By the time I actually entered Parliament in 2004, I was 53. It really some days was going out till midday. And it was starting to affect my performance, my enjoyment in particular. I know that so many people, because I'd had different careers and I'd had an extensive business career, and lots of people I'd be forever meeting people at airports that I knew from all sorts of walks of life, and they'd say, "How's you enjoying politics?" It's sort of a natural question for someone who's gone in at that age, and I knew I would consciously say I'm getting a lot of satisfaction, because I got early opportunities to be a minister, and then we lost government, but you go there to do things, and you can do things, and it's a most stimulating profession if you are involved in making things happen. And so I'd say I'm getting a lot of satisfaction. I never said I'm enjoying it. I very consciously, because I knew I wasn't enjoying it. I knew myself, and by that stage, early 50s, my wife and I would be discussing this phenomena in the mornings, and still never used the D word because I didn't have depression, but I knew subconsciously, obviously, that that's probably what I did have, but I talked to myself for years. Snap out of it, you're weak, you know, because I'd have meetings to go to, meetings to chair, and I knew I'd be in the middle of something and trying just to get my concentration or my confidence up, and then all of a sudden I'd feel it lift, and I'd be in a rush for the rest of the day, making calls and doing all the things that I wanted to do, because when I was in a positive frame of mind and looking to confront things, and so it was. Oh well, I got to live with it, as I do think so many others do. Lots of people have all sorts of problems, disabilities, and you learn to live with it. You lost half a leg, you learn to live with it. Whatever it might be, so many people. You've had cancer, you've had people, they work around it. And mental health issues are really no different, but it doesn't have to be for so many people, that's the point. And I thought I'd been covering it up. It was only when we went back to Melbourne, where I'd spent the first 28 years of my life, and I stood for Parliament. And my seat's on the bay around Brighton, just below the city. And I swim in the bay every day. And there's bunch of guys there, icebergers they call them, and so I got to meet this local group of men and women, and I would say hello, but then I'd go and do my swimming and then whatever. After about 12 months, one of the fellows I got to know quite well, and he came up to me, he said, "Oh Andrew, just if you got a second," he said, "there's something I need to tell you." He said, "Most of the lads, they think you're up yourself." Well, thanks Peter. Anything else you want to pass on while you're at it? And he said, "You don't talk to anybody. You say hello, but you don't talk to anybody." And I thought it really was a real low point, because it was my cover had been uncovered. And what I thought I'd been getting away with for so long. But it wasn't just that, it was the sort of disappointment that I knew I then had to engage. And there's a sauna, which I found all the knowledge is in the sauna too, so it was a benefit. But I would go in there after. I didn't like the sauna, but I'd go in after the swim, which seeing the water was sometimes 8 degrees, it wasn't a bad idea. But they'd be all, taking skin off one another and full of it. And I'd just throw in a comment here or there. So I got away with it for a couple of years down there, but it did bring home to me the fact that my cover had been blown to some extent, and also it was an irritation that I had to engage and to speak. I mean, nowadays I have to allow an extra half hour when I go each morning, because I'm talking on the way out go out and dive in a couple hundred metres out in the bay, and I'll be talking to people out on the way out. I talk to people on the way back in the sauna. So I'm a pest now. But so I started to accept that I had a depressive condition. In 2009, had a lot of things happening, and it was just the mornings were just every morning almost a problem. And I decided I'd talk to my local GP. So I went along and told him as quickly as I could what I've just told you, and I said, "You haven't got a pill, have you, to pick me up a bit?" And he said, "Oh, Andrew," he said, "all of those things, they're all in your head." Yes, that's very good. He said, "Medication's useless. You don't forget about that." He said, "I always I tell people to go and see this person." He gave me a card, and there was a psychologist, and just around the corner in her house. And anyway, a couple of weeks later, I'm sitting up there in the front parlour, literally sort of front parlour. She was at the end of her career, I think, but she's a lovely person. But she's sitting up there, got me on the couch, which was a bad start, and said to me, had the big note paper and was taking notes, which is fair enough. And she said, "Well, tell me about it." So I started. I would have only been going about 8 or 9 minutes. She said, "Tell me from the house, on the start." About 8 or 9 minutes, and she said, "Could you stop?" And she's whispering. I'm not sure why, because there's no one else in the house. But anyway, she's whispering, leaned across and said, "Could you tell me, were you loved by your mother and father when you were a child?" And, excuse the language, I thought, shit, I don't need this. It was sort of confirmed all my worst stereotypes of these things. And I hadn't really told her anything, and here I was having my childhood and my parents. Anyway, I thanked her very much. I paid her a cheque, $75, and said, hope she rest of her career went very well. I didn't think she was suited to me. And I went out the door and spent the next 5 months again talking to myself, saying about what a pathetic figure I was, stop being so weak. I really worked hard. I really worked very hard to try and get on top of this thing. I again thought it must be just me. I'm just being overreacting to this thing. Get on top of it, and but I had climate change, which was there was a little bit happening in that portfolio. Malcolm Turnbull was heading in. There was a leader was heading in one direction on this issue. I'm his shadow minister. The more I looked at it, I thought the policy that Kevin Rudd was putting up was a dog, and I was going in the opposite direction. So we spent many hours, most days, headbutting, and it was a very difficult time. And also I was out speaking endlessly and trying to do more work and all the rest of it. And but that was happening. But then Malcolm Turnbull had the Godwin Gretsch moment. If you remember, there was a fake email that he thought was a real email, and he sought to bury Kevin Rudd with it, and backfired. And all of my colleagues, this is about the middle of that year, so February I've gone to see the doctor, by June, end of June, this happened. All my colleagues were sort of deciding that Malcolm was not going to make the grade, and we were 12 months or more from an election, 15 months. And several of them started to approach me, including Peter Costello, who was still in the Parliament, to consider challenging Malcolm Turnbull. And I'd reached the same conclusion as they had, but I said to them, I'm interested, but I've got to think about it. And for the first time in my life, I was confronted with a decision where I thought this problem I had in the morning, this black dog, could well prevent me from doing the job, even if I got it, even doing the challenging, much less if I got it, that it might mean that I wasn't up to doing the job as it should be. And I knew the job. I mean, I'd been Chief of Staff to Peacock in the 1990 election, I'd run campaigns, I'd been in and around it. I knew the pressures, it's a 24/7, it's a difficult job. And but I was keen, but I thought I had this problem. So I then spent some weeks trying to work out my own mind. Could I do it, couldn't I? And people are still asking me if you're still thinking about it. And after about 4 weeks, I thought, I have got a problem. I don't think I can. I've got to find out what it is, see if it's fixable, and if it is, maybe then I can make a decision about it. But I've got to do it quickly because I've got all these people asking me. And so in the end, I picked up the phone to Jeff Kennett. It's another reason I'm standing here tonight, and I wrote the book because most people haven't got the opportunity. Just happened to the sort of jobs I'd been in. I knew him. I was in a position to pick up the phone to someone who was connected to very good professionals. And he got, within 4 days, I'm sitting up in front of a fellow named Professor John Tiller, who's one of Australia's best psychiatrists, and a lovely guy. And I'm there with John 8 o'clock the next Wednesday morning. Took him to tell me about it. I spent about 10 minutes. I kid you not, this happened. Really at about the 10-minute mark, at least I was sitting in a chair this time, I'm not on a couch, and he said, Andrew, could I stop you? And I thought, oh no, not my mother and father again. And he said, I just want to say to you, this is a chemical imbalance you've got, and it's fixable. Now go on. And it's one of the best moments in my life, I've got to say, that moment that when he said this thing is fixable. And so I told him, and at the end of it he said, you've got a problem with this imbalance, and he said medication can correct this, but it's a very it's a science which is not well developed. That's another thing I found. They know very little about the brain. But he said there's a lot of trial and error, a lot of clinical solutions. We don't know why they work, but they work. But different ones work for different people. And so he said it'll be trial and error. And he said, oh, by the way, there's likely to be some difficult side effects with some of this medication until you get the right answer. Then you'll be okay. Well, I didn't hear the qualifications. All I heard was this will be fixed. Out of the room, he's given me the pills. I'm thinking, I got home to my wife, I said 3 weeks, take these pills, few little bumps along the way, and then I'll be okay, and then I can make a decision. And I was so pumped, thinking how good this was going to be. Well, the next 4 weeks are the worst 4 weeks of my life. what was I saying? The side effects. There's a list of side effects. I had a look at them, and there was, I don't know, there would have been 30 odd. They're sort of covering their backside, I think it's called. Every possible side effect was listed as a possibility. And of course in the middle, there's one that said you could become more depressed than you are. Well, of course, Muggins got that one. And in fact, I was depressed 24/7. It was a terrible time, but in a way it was quite useful to find out what it is like to go 24/7 in this state of mind. And I really hit the, you know, you had to watch out. My wife had to watch out for suicide and things like that. And but at least I knew that it was self-inflicted and that I would come out of it, right? So, but I sat in my office for days just looking at the wall. I didn't want to answer phones. And as soon as I got to my feet at functions, because I was still doing a lot of public, the adrenaline would pump, I'd be okay, sit down, I'd just feel myself drain out of it. So no one noticed anything, and except my immediate staff, who I told what was going on. And but I've never been through anything like it in my life, and it was a really difficult time. And then after about 4 weeks, the side effects went away, and there's no difference to the underlying condition. So I went back to the psychiatrist and said, "Tell him what had happened." I said, "What do we do now?" He said, "I think we'll double the dose." Right, thank you very much. I said, "Am I likely to get all the side effects back again?" He said, "Probably." And of course, 4 days later, I'm back in Canberra, Parliament was sitting, and I got it back in spadefuls. I was just a mess, a total mess, and I was so depressed. And here I was, still not telling anybody, and something happened which I won't go into, it's too long-winded, but you can read the book, it's in the book. But I went outside to get some sun, the party room was on, I got called back in, which doesn't happen very often. You just know when you get called in, no one keeps tabs on who's coming and going, but the 100 people in the party room for 3 hours every Tuesday morning. But I knew there was a problem in my area, and sure enough, a lot of them were going at Malcolm, the leader at the time, over climate change. And I came back in and Malcolm said, "Andrew's back. There's 4 more speakers listed. Andrew will then sum up." And I listened to the next 4, they're all climbing into Malcolm. And I'm just beside myself. If the floor had opened up, I would have been very happy. And anyway, I'm trying to make a note or two, and finally the last one, Malcolm said, "Andrew will sum up." I stood up, and as I'm walking to the front again, I just feel the adrenaline engage again. And I performed. Whatever I said, it didn't. I didn't take skin off Malcolm, but let people feel they still had some say in what was happening with this issue. And whatever I said, I don't know what I said, but it must have been effective. Sat down, everyone saying, "Well done, Andrew." You know this, which usually, if that happens, you feel good about it. Within 30 seconds, I was back in deep depression, and I went out of the room. But there were people like Peter Costello who I hadn't seen for 3 or 4 weeks, and they all saw me perform, if you like, and it reminded people, and they just had a heavy session with Malcolm. So they're all on the phone again or calling into my office saying, "Are you still thinking about challenging?" And I said, "I'm thinking about it, and I'll let you know soon," because I knew that I'm starting to look a real goose. And I sat there and thought, this could take a long time. It was when I realised that the qualification that you need to be patient is so true. And I thought, I can't get through this without lifting this load somehow. I've got to get some space. And that meant leaving the shadow cabinet. Not necessarily the Parliament, but the shadow cabinet and all this. So, but that meant I had to tell people why. So I spent all day, missed question time, spent all day thinking about really the thing that probably been in the back of my mind for 43 years. If I do say something about this, when people find out I've got depression, will that be the end of my career? You know, and this time it was politics. And I did think, well, that's probably it. And in the end, I really had to decide that irrespective of what the consequences were, it was more important to tackle it. That was a decision I had to finally take. And and I did. I thought I've got nothing to prove at that stage. And so I went and saw Malcolm that night, told him everything, said I want 3 months leave, and did a column with Laurie Oakes to get it out there, did one radio interview, and then I kept working, but I went out of the public eye and I experimented. And it took me 6 months. I tried several different medications and different levels of medications. Nothing worked, nothing looked like working for me. Different types of side effects. I could tell you about all sorts of interesting side effects, but you come out of it again. I'd be on it for 3 weeks, side effects would go, no change, the underlying condition. Then I got to a thing that I'm on Pristig now, and I'd gone 50 milligrams, 100 milligrams, 150, 200. I rang the psychiatrist, said 200, 3 weeks, nothing's happened. And I could see he's exasperated too, and he said, oh, Andrew, go to 250 or 300. I was at 200, go to 250 or 300. Of course I went to 300. And 2 days later, I got up, quarter to 6, I'm standing in the bathroom, and I thought, hang on, I got this clear head. You know, I had no inhibitions, I wasn't hyper or anything. I was just like I would be later in the day. And I didn't say anything to my wife. I thought this could be just a one-off. Next 2 days were a little bit shaky. Day after that, got up, clear head. I haven't had a day since, which is not the same as that clear head. I've been really blessed with 2.5 years of a treatment which has worked for me for the whole 2.5 years, and it's just been magnificent, really. But it just, I suppose that the lesson is for me, I think that firstly you've got to confront it. If you've got a problem, you think you've got a problem, you've got to go and deal with it. And the fact is nowadays, you know, over 80% either get to cure it or manage it if they confront it, but only a third confront it. A third of all those that are suffering, the estimate is, but and of those that do seek some help, and there's all sorts of things that'll find your way out of it. The second thing is that you do need to share it. If you're confronting it, you need a loved one, a wife, husband, whoever, partner, whoever. There's someone who you can share, who can help you through it, and it's very important, I think, very difficult to deal with by yourself. There's no need to tell the world. I was in a circumstance I really didn't have much choice, and but for most people, and in fact it's interesting, after it got some publicity, and especially after I released the book and some people read it, I got notes from lots of people in very senior positions, some who you would know very well, national figures who are responsible for tens of thousands of jobs. They employ tens of thousands of people. And they wrote me notes or sent me a text or whatever to the effect, welcome to the club. Now these are people I'd worked with, some of them, certainly knew very well, others I never knew, suspected. They always looked like they're on top of everything. And yet obviously at some stage in their life they'd had to confront it, they had confronted it, got help. But for most people they don't need to tell the world. You can deal with it on the quiet, and as I say, in so many cases now, you can fix it. So that was my experience, and long may it last. Thank you.
Has anybody got any questions? Yeah. You were saying that when you were trying the first batch of medication that first month, that you got worse, and you were, one of the things that gave you help was that knowing that you would come out the other end. Was that actually something that you had to remind yourself of regularly? Because I've seen similar sort of scenarios where some people ended up killing themselves in those scenarios, and because they weren't having somebody around them to support them.
Yes, well, yes to both. Yes to both questions in a sense. Yes, I did have to keep reminding myself, because no, despite the fact I knew that was self-inflicted in a way. It didn't stop the fact that I was so deeply depressed. And the psychiatrist did insist that my wife came in before I was very, within the 2 days when I started it, and have a conversation, and to tell her that with that particular medication, people can suicide. And, a couple of times we went away for weekends and just down the beach, and I just really curled up in a ball on the couch for 2 days, and I couldn't show interest in anything. I didn't want to listen to music. I love music. Certainly couldn't stand a television. I didn't read books. Nothing. Anything she tried, I wouldn't be aggressive or grumpy or anything. I just didn't want to know the world, and you did feel this sort of deep sense of despair and disconnection with the world in a way, as though it's meaningless and all those sort of sentiments. So it can be dangerous. That's why I say you do need somebody who you trust and love, who shares, I think, especially those sorts of experiences with you, if you're going to see it through properly.
Yes.
Sorry, you go. At any time did you think that there was a religious issue or a spiritual issue? That you could say turn to or become involved in?
You mean through my life, or?
Yeah, that you thought, maybe, in that old-fashioned way, that there was
No.
some sort of religious solution to...
No, I strongly believe there is a spiritual component to our lives, or it's very helpful if there is, that you're able to deal with things much more effectively, and people get that spiritual experience in all sorts of. I go to church, but not frequently. I do believe in a God, but I'm not that convinced about a lot of the teachings of the church and all that. It doesn't worry me, frankly. It's a discipline for me to think about things, but I find, in nature and art and things, I find spiritual experiences at times. So it's an important part of my life, but I didn't see it as, to me, this was it was part of me, and I just had to deal with it, right? It's like the fact that I wasn't able to play for Melbourne. I wasn't good enough to play for Melbourne. I had to deal with that too. But yeah, it wasn't something I thought to know in a spiritual sense.
Thank you so much for what you've shared. I'd be interested to know whether there was any aspect of seasonality in your experience, because you talked about times and sunlight, and I wonder whether it varied across the year.
Yes, it did. Certainly, I think I left Melbourne. One of the motivations was to head towards more sun. So Canberra, choosing that job that I mentioned at 28, meant I left Melbourne, and we had a young child and we were married, but I know in my own heart that I was looking for sun in winter, and because I did feel bad. It's a recognised fact. The other thing is that the psychiatrist got me, he said there's lots of different treatments these days, things that would have been seen as witchcraft even 20 years ago, which are now recognised as playing some part. It's such an inexact science that I don't really know what's working and why most of the time. But there is an acceptance by now sort of recognised medicine of the potential role of a lot of these other things. So, acupuncture and all sorts of things actually. But he did send me along. He said, you've got a problem with the cycles of your body, and you're releasing chemicals somehow that when and in certain quantities that you shouldn't be, and whatever. And he sent me along to a chap who's a specialist a sleep specialist with the cycles. I never had a problem sleeping, but it's the same principle. And this chap gave me an electronic pill, which took 2 days to pass through me. and they strapped a receiver to my chest. And every 10 seconds, the pill transmitted my core body temperature. And at the end of 2 days, they graphed all that data. And he said, there you are, there's your problem. Your core body temperature hit a minimum both mornings at around 7 a.m. He said, for most people, your core body temperature hits a minimum between 2 and 3 a.m. in the morning, not 7 a.m. And he said, when your core body temperature hits a minimum, sends a signal to the brain, stop producing melatonin, which your body's full of overnight, start producing serotonin. So by the time you wake up, your body's either full or largely full of serotonin. And so he said, you're not getting any serotonin in your system. And it is an established fact. Not everyone who's had that phenomena gets depression, but a lot of people do, until their body fills up with. And that's why I would pop out of it. That's why I'd feel this cloud lift, and it just took, I think, as I got older, it took longer and longer for my body to produce, I assume, the quantities of serotonin. But one of the solutions was that he gave me this little blue box of blue light. And so for 18 months after I started taking the tablets, every morning I'd get up at 5:45, and for half an hour with this little, it's like the size of an iPad, and just put on a little stand, and it's very strong, you can't look directly at it for long, but just put it across your eyes. The blue part of the light spectrum again sends a signal to your brain to release serotonin. So this would concentrate at 6 a.m. my further release, and with some melatonin tablets and all. They were all trying to shift my cycle back, which they seem to, I think, but who knows, I'm still on the medication, so it's a bit hard to tell. But he also said, open the blinds. And it was even that in itself, because when you got your eye, even when you're asleep, it doesn't help much in Melbourne in winter, but already it is. Like, it's 5:15 now, it's light in Melbourne, and if your blinds are open, you might be asleep, but the light is still going through your eyelids. You know, when you close your eyes now, you can see a bit of a light here. Well, it goes through your eyelids, and the blue part of the light spectrum starts to tell you to produce serotonin. So there's all these these issues. And I now go to nursing homes and things, and they've got banks of blue lights above people with dementia. And they found, again, they don't really know what's going on, but they've found that people, they're far more relaxed and not aggressive. In the afternoon, a lot of dementia patients get frustrated and angry, and it calms them down, just this blue light. So light's got a big part to play with.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming and talking to us about what we talked about tonight. And I know you very much talked about your own personal experience, but coming from politics and having depression, I'd be interested in your opinion of how you saw someone like Curtin and him having that same condition and the things that he had to deal with, especially in 1942. How do you think he would have felt in that situation?
I don't know whether he responded like I did to adrenaline. You know, there's been a lot of figures in history who've been manic depressive or whatever. I don't know how you could do what he had to do if you were 24/7. Right? I mean, he must have had well, it sounds like from what you read, John, that it was a bipolar type condition that he had, where it would come and go, right? And that would happen. That's what happened to Churchill and others. And when it was on, it was debilitating, and when it was off, they were larger than life figures. And mine has not tended to be. I didn't have highs and lows. I mean, I had a low, but then I come back to normal, right? And I'd be a bit pumped. I'm an A-type character, but I'm not sort of walking across the ceiling like some people do. So I don't like to avoid it. I just don't know, to be honest. I just assume that, you know, when those sort of people, if it is bipolar, they often do some wonderful things and some great things when they're in the sort of up phase. And I assume that he had a lot of times in the up phase when he was Prime Minister, because otherwise, you know, it'd be very, very difficult to do what he had to do.
Oh, a couple more questions. We've got the person sitting next to him.
Without breaking confidentiality, I'm not going to ask if your parents loved you, but in terms of your family,
They do now, but
I'm
anyway.
interested in the sort of family genetic side. I just when you come from a big family, don't name names, but do any of your brothers or sisters share similar problems in terms of depression?
Yeah, I think it's in. Not that I haven't observed my sort of depression, but I've had a couple of sisters, or 5 sisters, and a couple of them after having children. They had postnatal, but that again is a different type. But my mother had that after one, went off to the Grey Sisters and told Mum was resting for months. But you did, as kids you didn't even think about, oh yeah, right, we were staying with friends, this is good, you know. But she went on to have another 4 kids after that, so and didn't have that problem again. My father, we left the land, and he was in his early 40s. Got burned out on our property and all sorts of things, so they had to really sell it. I don't think they could afford with the kids to educate us unless they left, and we ended up in the city, and he was not qualified to do anything else, and he ended up doing working in a factory for the rest of his life, 12 hours day shift one week, 12 hours night shift the next. So he, I think he was depressed for a lot of that time. You know, he's a man, his self-esteem was taken off him, all this, I mean, he was educated, sent all his kids to private schools and all that, but you know, his own self-worth, he's been fine, he's 89 and just bought a new car, so it's pretty good, I thought. But yeah, but so there was episodic stuff, and yeah, a couple of sisters have had bad bouts of it, and but there's sort of no common type, and not all of us, you know, so, and looking back at, you don't know, this is the thing, you know, people would, it's Aunt Joan, she's got nerves, you know, well, Aunt Joan had depression, you know, and they called it nerves, and it's why they don't know anything about the brain, I think, is, well, they know very little compared with so many other areas of the body. And now I get invited to go to hospitals and look at what they're doing in this space, and it's you know, a real eye-opener. I go to some of these hospitals, they're spectacular hospitals. You walk through world-class wards and hospital facilities, then you get out to the back of the hospital in the sheds, and they put a new coat of paint on, and they've got, this is where the mental health section is. I mean, I'm not kidding you, and it sort of tells you everything, really, that there have been no champions for this area, because no one wants to have been, well, it's changing in that regard, but no one has wanted to identify with it, either your family, friends, or family, your friends, or you yourself. So, and as a consequence, there is a lot of clinical good work done, but even though I've been to the pharmaceutical companies and they say, well, we do a batch of 40 of different permutations and combinations of chemicals, and we find number 37 works with 95% of the population, so we get it registered. We don't know what it does. We know what the outcome is, but we don't know how it achieves it. Yes, sir.
Did you start writing your book while you still had the problem, before you found the pharmaceutical chemical answer?
No.
Or afterwards?
No, it was about, it was nearly a year after I nailed it. And in fact, I'd never thought of writing a book. I mean, I like writing speeches, but I spent a lot of time on it. And I'd never thought I had a book in me, frankly, but I got halfway through the treatment, and Louise Adler, who runs Melbourne University Press, is a sort of larger-than-life person, gets on the end of the phone, she's saying, Andrew, you've got to tell people about this. And it was the absolute last thing I felt like. I mean, I never wanted to write a book anyway, but much, and then now she's offering me to write a book in the middle of all of this experimentation, and I just said to Louise, look, I'll think about it, Louise, but had absolutely no intention. And about 3 days later, I happened to have a regular sort of appointment with my psychiatrist. And I go and I'm sitting, we finished, and he said, oh, by the way, Andrew, just before you leave, he said last weekend lots of the psychiatrists in Victoria got together. He said we do it once a year just to compare notes. Right? He said during the morning, a psychiatrist got up and said, there's a funny thing happened. The last 2 months I've had, especially men over 40 and especially executives, I've had a real spike in people coming to see me for the first time. And then someone else stood up and said something similar. And in the end, they all concluded it was because there'd been some publicity about my problem 2 months before. And so I went home and I thought about this, and I mean, when it went public, it wasn't as like a front page story, and it lasted, you know, over a weekend, and there were a couple of stories and things, but I didn't feel it was out there, which I wanted people to know what was wrong, but it wasn't sort of saturation coverage of any of that sort of stuff. And yet I thought, if that sort of modicum of publicity can have that effect, I think I'll do something about it. So I rang Louise and I said, if I happen to nail this, I'll write the book. If I don't, you won't hear from me. Because I wanted to be able to say to people, if I could, that you can have a problem, you can manage it, it can get the better of you, you can confront it, and in many cases go back and even have more responsibility than you had in the first place, which is true for me. And that was my hope. And when it turned out nearly 12 months after I found the answer, I had more responsibility than I had previously, and so I wrote the book.
I think on that note, we might call Deborah to give a vote of thanks.
Could I just, sorry Deborah, just as one thing, which really seals it for me as to why we've got to talk about it. The day before I released the book, I did an interview with on the ABC, that's in Brisbane, Conversation Hour, Richard Feidler, thanks, yeah. And it's a live interview for an hour in the morning, Wednesday morning or Tuesday, whatever it was. And I did the interview and I had to go and catch an aircraft. And I was in the car, I hadn't got to the airport, and I got this email on my BlackBerry before I even got to the airport. And it was, hey Andrew, or whichever of his minions read this. I heard your interview on ABC today regarding your experience with depression. I've had depression for years, and when I heard you speak this morning, it really made me realise yet again that depression is not a weakness but a legitimate issue. As I'm still a student in high school, I suppose I'm under rather a lot of pressure to do well, though in comparison to pressure placed upon you as a federal politician, it probably seems like nothing. Lately I've been feeling that I'm not going to do anything in life because I tend to have weeks or months in which I feel rather like you described in the interview, staring at the wall for 2 hours rather than answering calls and emails. But you showed me that it's not a case of my being lazy or, well, stupid. If successful men such as yourself have felt this way, then maybe there's a hope for a 16-year-old schoolgirl. I do feel like rather an idiot for saying all of this, but you have actually made me feel like pursuing my goal of studying law for the first time in months. Thank you, Claire. How good was that?